I'm John Chamberlain. I'm on the board of the Arkansas Academy of Computing, and I'm going to interview one of our 2014 inductees, Jerry Blackburn. Jerry, could you tell us the story of how you first got introduced to computers and got into computing?
I graduated from Hendrix College in 1961 with a degree in literature and philosophy. I was a couple of years later, by 1963, I was working in New York for an aptitude research foundation called the Johnson O'Connor Research Foundation. I had taken a 2-day battery of aptitude tests over in Tulsa, and I was so interested in the test that I wound up working for the company. But my aptitude pattern indicated that I would most enjoy and probably be most successful at some kind of work that involved problem solving in a structural environment, not structured, but structural, 3D machines, x-rays, medicine, architecture, something like that. They didn't mention at all computers. This was in the very early days of computing. So, but I had a good friend who had gotten into programming, and also a brother-in-law who had gotten into programming at about that time, and they loved it. And it seemed to me that would, using machines to solve problems, kind of fit my aptitude pattern. So at that time, I was really interested in scientific programming more than accounting type applications. And I went and applied at several places, knocked on several doors around Philadelphia, and got turned down because they were looking for people with math and science degrees. We had started a family, and I didn't really think I could afford to go back to school for another degree, so I got a job teaching math and science for a couple of years, and then went back and tried again, and was hired by the Service Bureau Corporation, which was an IBM subsidiary spun off by court consent decree, their programming division. And they hired me as a programmer trainee in New York. They had rented the upper floor of the Waldorf Hotel, which was being renovated at the time, and they were holding computer classes up there. So we went through about a 6-week course. I think we had a week on computer basics, binary arithmetic and so forth, a week on, I think, assembler language, a week on COBOL, a week on Fortran, something about it was really intense. And about half the class dropped out before it was over, but it was a really intense program. And then they put us to work. So shortly after the end of the class, they needed more programmers in Boston to work on a big Air Force contract. Before that, I had worked, or I also did some application work for an insurance company, actuarial tables, trying to predict life expectancies for people different age, sex, and so forth. But most of my work for SBC was on a big nuclear Air Force contract for a nuclear war game with Air Force at Hanscom Field near Boston. We started looking for a house and decided it was going to be prohibitively expensive to buy in Boston, so we started looking at moving to Little Rock. My wife was from New Jersey, just outside New York City. Didn't like the cold weather. So we started looking and wound up getting a job with Control Data Corporation, which had just sold a computer to, at that time it was called the Med Center, UAMS today. And wound up going there to support the installation of this new computer for 2 years. At the end of that time, I was about to be reassigned somewhere else, and the Med Center, UAMS, made a job offer as assistant director. About a year later, I took that. About a year later, the director left, and I was acting director for about a year, and then became director of computer services until about 1981. And at that time I left, and I don't know whether you want to know a little about some things we did at UAMS.
Sure. What were some of the high points of that?
We did all this. We had a Control Data CDC 3300 computer. We did all the typical accounting things, patient billing, payroll, general ledger, that sort of thing. But the applications that interested me the most were the things that we got into, like EKG analysis, classroom scheduling. We started getting a little into computer-assisted instruction and so forth. So those were the things that I really enjoyed the most, and working with faculty too. Then after about I guess one of the biggest applications we had was the migrant student record transfer system. Dr. John Long, who had been the Director of Computer Services before me, had secured a large federal grant to set up a database to track health and academic records for children of migrant workers all over the country. The problem was that students would show up in school somewhere, and it would be 3 or 4 days before they could figure out what their math level was, reading level, whether they'd had shots. A lot of the students would show up, and if they couldn't prove they had had a standard shot, a battery of shots required in that school, would have to take the same shots again that they had had somewhere else not long ago. I think I heard of one student who had like 8 or 10 sets of shots in the course of a year or so. They tracked, anyway, the purpose of the system was for a student to show up. If they didn't have that information, someone at the school could contact a migrant student record transfer system regional center. They would dial in with, at that time, a teletype, could look up that student's record, print it out, and the student could get immediately placed at the right school.
Early 70s.
Right.
No,
actually, it was, about 69, I think, 69, was when it started.
So very, very early terminal use.
Right. It was a really interesting application. We wound up, we had about 300,000 students in there and about 150 terminals scattered around the United States dialing into UAMS, the CDC 3300. About 1974, we started realizing the need the migrant student system grew to the point where they got their own computer, moved to a separate building down near the state capitol, and it was beginning to take a lot of our resources. We were running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and a good part of one shift was devoted to processing, printing out, and mailing migrant student record transfer records. So in that sense, it was probably good that they went ahead and got their own system. About that time, we acquired a DEC System 10 time-sharing system. Time-sharing was brand new about that time. One of the benefits was that programmers and end users could write their own programs online with no job control language, without waiting on batch jobs to run overnight or whatever. And the programmers told me they could get more done in a day than they could in a week using traditional turnaround. So that was a big step forward. Then about 6 years later, around 1980, there was a big push on to get a more sophisticated patient record system. A lot of things we hadn't been able to do before, and there was a system that was designed to run on IBM systems. So we got an IBM 4341 about 1980. So in the course of the 11 years I was there, we had about 3 different systems. I left in 1981 to help form a small computer company called CompuNet Incorporated. Our timing was really poor. We started at what we thought was the bottom of the upturn in the 1980 recession. Turned out to be the top of the downturn. So after about 2 years, we wound up closing down. And Hendrix College where I graduated, had a fire in the administration building in January, February of about 1982. Had burned the building down with the computer in the basement and all of their backup tapes destroyed in this fire. It was a Burroughs computer system. They went out for bid and selected a Digital Equipment Corporation VAX system, which was actually the system I would at that time most wanted to manage if I could. So they hired me in February of '83, and I wound up working until 2001 for Hendrix. It was a great job. I thoroughly enjoyed working with faculty and staff there. It was great working for my alma mater. The students were fantastic. We had we used a lot of work-study students, and they were just amazing. One year, 100% of our work-study students were national merit finalists. So they were super bright students. I tried to match them up with applications or problems they were interested in. So if a faculty member in accounting called and needed help with an application or whatever, then I would try to send somebody who was interested in that, who was an accounting major or whatever, so they would get direct experience in the area they were most interested in.
So by that time, you'd been in computing for over 40 years?
Well, I was actually in computing a total about 35 years,
okay.
About 6 years before I got into academic computing at UAMS, and then
okay.
about 35 years
after that. So do you have some reflections on how computing changed in that time, either the equipment or what people were trying to do with computers?
The first program I ever wrote was at a continuing education program at the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia. And they had a UNIVAC 1 there. They used paper tape for input, as I remember.
Okay.
Huge thing. It was about, I don't know, 300 square feet or so, about 7 feet tall or so. And they used to turn the lights off, and the place just glowed. It had 3,000 or 4,000 vacuum tubes in the old orange glowing vacuum tube, and it was really quite a sight. You could actually walk inside the thing, as I remember, but all that would fit on an iPhone today. I mean, the computing power of that machine. Those were the days when then we got into punch cards. Everybody remembers the old decks of punch card. I remember in the programming class in New York, a girl had her Fortran program in a box and spilled it on the subway, and at 5 o'clock rush hour time, cards all over the floor. So she had to start all over. But so going to online programming years later with the DEC 10 was a huge step forward. I remember the early 360s when they first came out. It just seemed like a miracle that multiprocessing, multitasking, the whole idea that you could be reading a card for one job, processing a previous job, and printing one from the one before that all at the same time just seemed like a
miracle.
A miracle, yeah. That was really a big deal. That's old hat now, but at the time it was really important. Time sharing was a big deal. Running, 20, 30 programs at the same time on one machine, everybody doing something different was
Any
a big
thoughts
deal.
about where it goes from here?
I was interested this morning in some of the student papers that we saw. I think we're going to see things like 3D printing is going to make a big impact in manufacturing, distribution, and we may see things printed out in the stores or even in the home rather than or produced, rather than having to make them in a factory and ship them somewhere. I think artificial intelligence is going to doing things like analyzing X-rays, making middle-level management decisions. I think a lot of the jobs that we think today are immune from automation may not be. I think driverless cars, robots of all kinds, we're going to see a lot more of that. I think the downside of that is it's going to displace a lot of people from employment. We're going to have to rethink maybe our tax structure to some kind of value-added tax or something, because not as many people are going to be as employed maybe and be taxable for income tax purposes as we have today.
Those are sort of back to your liberal arts roots.
I guess so.
Think of that. Do you have any words of wisdom to particularly students that are trying to get into computing today?
I would say try to be as user-oriented as possible. It bothers me a little the shift from computer services to IT, information technology. I think it's very easy to focus on the technology instead of the end users, trying to make them as productive and creative as possible, as independent as possible, do as much for themselves as possible. You see a lot of cartoons or the stereotype of the IT person that people sort of come groveling to for help, and I think we need to be very careful about getting away from that image, focusing on the end, kind of like medicine is doing, the patient-oriented medicine, focusing on the end user in this case. So it's easy. I used to look for students in the computer lab that other students were coming to for help, and then recruit those to work for us at Hendrix. I found it was a lot easier to teach somebody the technical things they needed to know to do the job than it was to teach them that user orientation, having a genuine desire to help other people be more than they were before they could use computers. So it's good to know you're being excellent in your technical area, but I think it's also important to be user focused.
Okay. Yeah. Jerry, thanks for talking to us today.
Thanks, enjoyed it.
Very interesting career and some good thoughts.
Well, it was, as they say, a great run. I thoroughly enjoyed my years in computing, and especially the academic computing years, and would do it all over again if I could.
Thanks. And we'll look forward to doing some things with you in the Academy of Computing.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.